This is Friday, April 29th, picking up where I left off and mentioning the assassination of President Kennedy and listening to the radio reports of that with Barney Chesner in the Pontiac delivery wagon. And I just thought I'd continue and talk a little bit about Barney and the Chesners and about Gary, my friendship with Gary. Barney was, with the name Chesner, which is actually, I think, a French name. He was very proud of his Irish heritage, and he also had a connection to Montana. I think he had been born in Montana, and it was Barney's connection, I think, to Montana that was one of the reasons he took a liking to me, because he knew that I had relatives in Montana. It was also the Irish connection. Barney was very proud of his Irish background. But Barney had married Guadalupe, or Lupe as we fondly referred to her, who was a Mexican immigrant, and Lupe was the loving mother of Gary and his older brother, whose name I don't quite remember now. But Lupe was very fond of me and used to feed me good Mexican food, and Gary and I became very close friends. Played a lot of baseball. We played together on the Navy Marine American Legion team. I played right field mostly, and he played shortstop, and we never won a game. We lost 22 games that season and had 0 wins, but we had a couple of very interesting games in which we traveled to local prisons, to St. Cloud State Prison and to Stillwater State Prison, and played the inmates, and that was quite an experience. Gary and I continued to play a lot of basketball at some of the area outdoor courts, and with some of the friends that we knew from Patrick Henry, and I was became acquainted later on with Gary's ex-girlfriend, Peggy Anderson. Peggy, after she and Gary broke up, decided she liked me, and she had access to her brother's white Mercury convertible, and she used to come and get me, and I think Gary was a little jealous about that, but Gary got over it, and he met a very nice girl from my old neighborhood, the Camden neighborhood, named Colette Shish. And the two of them eventually got married and are still married today. In fact, Tom and I have plans to stop by and visit them the next time I'm in Minneapolis. As time went on, the job with the City Mattress Company became more and more difficult. The company was not doing well, and Barney really couldn't afford to pay me and keep the company going, even though Lupe was doing most of the work in the shop. She would actually do most of the work on building mattresses and recovering box springs, and Barney would do the recovering of kitchen chairs, which proved to be, as I mentioned earlier, a line of work that I was able to turn into some income when I was in Aberdeen, South Dakota. But I did get an offer that summer to go to Aberdeen, and took Boxy along with me, and the two of us investigated the wrestling team and met some of the members of the team, met the coaches, and I was offered an opportunity to do some part-time work as a student assistant to the coaches, actually just kind of picking up and cleaning up the locker room. And but even before that, I had been doing some coaching of Patrick Henry's wrestling team, and it was there that I met, or actually reacquainted myself with Bruce Bastian, who I was later to go on several trips with. Very interesting trips. Also met Neil Brodeen, who was the younger brother of one of my brother Pat's friends, who later turned out to be a known and renowned sculptor in Minneapolis. But the wrestling coaching opportunity kept me in good shape and gave me the opportunity to do coaching, which was valuable in terms of my trip out to South Dakota. I was able to talk to the coaches about helping them both as an assistant or student coach and helping around the locker room, and that gave me the benefits I needed to talk them into giving me some student aid so I could reduce my tuition there. We were looking, there were several of us from De La Salle, not only myself, but my friend Joe Sabas from our neighborhood, Ron Hilson and Don Hilson, both De La Salle wrestlers, Dave Kreider and Lloyd Kretz, who both wrestled with me at De La Salle, and Murray Wolf and Jack DeGidio, also De La Salle wrestlers, all enrolled at Northern State. And we were looking for a place to live, so I did a little scouting. I took my motorcycle out in the summer of 1964. I had a 125 Yamaha that I had bought, and I rode that all the way out to Aberdeen. And at first I rented a room at the local YMCA and found a job directing traffic at a local shopping center. But then I was able to get the job at the mobile home company, and I was able to locate an apartment in the basement across the street from the mobile home company. The owner of the apartment was actually the downstairs of his home, and he was the uncle of the Fisher quintuplets, who were born in Aberdeen shortly before that. So this was a good-sized apartment. I think it was a two-bedroom apartment. Joe and I had one of the bedrooms we shared, and Ron and Don had the other bedroom. But it was there that I had the opportunity to meet a student from Presentation College. Her name was Karen Myers, and Karen had been somewhat interested, I guess, been asked out on a date by Ron Hilson. Ron was very much a ladies' man and kept bringing over new girls all the time, and Karen was a cute little blonde who came over in Ron's Thunderbird convertible, but Ron had an errand to do, so he asked me to keep Karen occupied until he had run his errand, which I did, and before you knew it, Karen and I were having a great conversation, such that Ron, when he came back, looked and saw that we were very much engaged with one another, and he suggested that I give her a ride home on my motorcycle, which I did. And that ride ended up becoming a relationship that lasted throughout the time I was at Aberdeen. And Karen almost came back to Minneapolis with me. In fact, I had tried to talk her into moving to Minneapolis after the school year was over, but she had wanted to finish up her degree at Presentation, so that's what she decided to do. We had several adventures while we were in Aberdeen. Jack DeGidio, one of our schoolmates, was actually he was a prolific shoplifter, and he used to go shoplift things like steaks and different cuts of meat and bring them over to our place and fry them up, and we would all share in the bounty of his illicit activities. And he would do a number of other things. But Jack was also about 125 pounds, and he was a black belt in Taekwondo. And there were a couple of incidents where we got in bar fights, and Jack walked outside with a guy that was probably a foot taller and probably 100 pounds heavier, and he just literally took the guy apart with roundhouse kicks and karate punches, and So we got a reputation as being the tough guys in town, and we didn't have much to worry about. Um, so it was a good year in South Dakota, although very cold. Aberdeen was colder than Minneapolis. There are very few trees in that area of South Dakota, and the wind in the wintertime would just come whipping down Main Street. And getting to school at that time, we didn't have a car. We had to walk to school. It was a terribly unpleasant trip to walk the 10 or 11 blocks to the campus from our apartment. I also found that Dave Kreider and Lloyd Kretz were not good housekeepers, and sharing an apartment with them proved to be a real pain in the neck. We were always carrying out the garbage and cleaning up after them, and eventually Joe and I found a cute little apartment over on campus, and the two of us moved out. And so in March, I decided that I wanted to go back to Minneapolis for my brother Pat's birthday, which is March 17th. And I decided I was going to ride my motorcycle. That was the only transportation I had. So I dressed up in all the warm clothes I had, put on 2 or 3 pairs of pants and a couple of layers of coats. And I had an old helmet, but I didn't have any goggles, so I borrowed goggles from one of my other friends who had a motorcycle. And I took off heading for Minneapolis, and the temperature leaving Aberdeen was probably about 55 or 60 degrees. It was pretty pleasant. But by the time I got to Summit, South Dakota, not even to the Minnesota border, the temperature had dropped down to in the 30s. And I remember stopping at the local police station and post office to get a cup of coffee and sit down and talk with the police chief and postmaster, who were the same person. Got warmed up and had a nice conversation and headed off and got to Ortonville, Minnesota, which is the border with South Dakota, where there was a cafe that was open, and I got another cup of coffee and continued on down the road. And it seemed that as the weather got colder, the engine in my motorcycle continued to get slower and slower, and finally I was going, instead of going 50 miles an hour, I was going 30 miles an hour and then 25 miles an hour. And I got to an intersection, not even a town, but an intersection where there was a gas station, but it looked closed, but the lights were on. So I went around and I knocked on the door of the house that was behind the gas station, and there was a guy that came to the door, had a huge scar on his face. He looked like something out of a horror movie, but he invited me into the gas station, made some coffee, and offered me a pastry of some kind, and we sat and talked for a while. Just a wonderful guy, but you never know it to look at him. But he sympathized with me, and he apparently had owned a motorcycle at one time and had an idea what it's like riding when the temperature is below freezing on a bike. So I headed out from there, and I made it to Benson and then to Wilmer, and by this time I was stopping at every town that I could along the way, stopping to get a cup of coffee and use the bathroom because it was so cold. When I got to Wilmer, there was so much snow on the ground that cars had red flags on their antennas so you could see them coming out of side streets. I continued on Highway 12 all the way to Minneapolis. It took me 19 and a half hours to get from Aberdeen to Minneapolis, and that trip would normally take 6 hours if you could go 50 or 60 miles an hour. But 19 and a half hours was the amount of time it took, and that meant stopping at every town, every chance I got where I could get into a cafe or a gas station and get warmed up. When I got home the next afternoon, I stumbled kind of in a crouch position into the house, into my mom and dad's house. My dad evidently saw me coming through the front window, and he made a hot toddy. My mother started the bath water, and had a warm bath waiting for me shortly thereafter. I've never been so cold before that in my life, and I had actually been ice fishing when I was 15 years old with my dad, when the temperature on Lake Mille Lacs was 48 below, and I don't think I was as cold that night as I was riding that motorcycle home from Aberdeen in 1964. But it did warm up, and I did ride my motorcycle back to Aberdeen, and finished the year there. I remember trading in the smaller bike I had, the 125 Yamaha, for a brand new 250 Yamaha, and riding that back to Aberdeen, and that would go quite a bit faster. So, and the weather was getting warmer. So when the school year ended, I offered an opportunity to Kit Benedum, a friend of mine, a woman that I knew, to ride on the back of the bike back to Minneapolis with me. And she suggested that two of her friends should come to Minneapolis too, and I had been in communication with my brother Pat, who had an apartment, and offered a place for the three of them to stay. So the three of them moved in with my brother, and one of them, whose name was Carol Pierce, got romantically involved with my brother Pat, and eventually they had a son together. I never found out what happened to Kit Benedum. She and I had the possibility of a bit of a romance, and Karen Myers, my girlfriend from Aberdeen, decided not to come to Minneapolis, so there was nothing going there. But that was sort of the end of the South Dakota chapter of my life, and that fall I enrolled at the University of Minnesota as I had planned and had been suggested by my English teacher, Mrs. Ben, and enrolled in the journalism program, which I was very interested in, and also started taking classes in political science with the ambition of becoming a political reporter, eventually maybe for the Washington Post. That was kind of my dream. So that would have been the fall of 1965, I believe, that I started school at the University of Minnesota. And I attended the University of Minnesota for 3 years. It was that summer that I believe I was over at my friend Richard Adams' house, and he introduced me to, actually his brother Philip was going out with Dinah Kelly, and I met Dinah Kelly, and then Philip had also decided he was going to take Twyla Kelly, her older sister, out. So it was there, I believe, at Richard's house that I initially met Twyla Kelly. And then when the summer came around of that year, I was actually, it would have been the summer of '65, I believe. I was out at Lake Calhoun with my friend Thornton Jones, whom we called TJ, and he saw Twyla along with a girl that he was interested in, a girl named Linda Anderson, and she and Twyla were good friends, so we talked them into coming and sitting in the car and talking with us, listening to some music and maybe having something to drink. And eventually I suggested to Twyla that I would give her a ride home, which I did in my Corvair, my 1966 Corvair Monza, and she and I hit it off quite well, and we started going out with one another, and before you knew it, we were very much involved with each other.